So this diver finds a body. They'd actually been looking for this kid for several days. It was 1992, and his parents were desperate. The police were stumped. 30 feet down in the cold black murk of Shawnee Lake, a flashlight carved this narrow beam through the silt, illuminating pale skin, bloated, discolored, eyes clouded white. Algae clung to the boy's lifeless face like a mask in a horror film. His body was swollen from days of being underneath the water. Well, the diver tapped his mic and he said, "I can't believe it, but I think we found him." Yellow crime scene tape was put into place and looky-loos squinted, trying to see the action. Radios crackled with the same stunned phrase over and over. Boy recovered. Male, juvenile, matches the description. 9-year-old Aaron Fitzpatrick, missing since Thursday, was finally found. And interestingly, his body was discovered exactly where a teenage girl said that it would be, deep in the murky waters of Shawnee Lake. She was 17 years old, and she had never met this boy before. She had never seen the yellow Chevy Vega that brought his lifeless body to this location. Never even set foot anywhere near this lake. But what she did do was insane. She walked into the sheriff's department, she looked the detective squarely in the eyes, and then she said, "I know where a dead body is." She described a murder scene that she had never been to, and when the body was found exactly where she said that it would be, everyone scratched their heads. How in the world did this teenage girl know this? Well, maybe it had something to do with the fact that she had died just 3 years earlier.
Welcome to Velarcana. Here, we share mysteries that often defy explanation. I research the cases, and my husband tells the stories.
No one would have been able to guess that before the day was over, Suzy Quan was gonna die. It was a sweltering Saturday in the summer of 1989 in Topeka, Kansas. Suzy Quan and her best friend Mary Gao had come to the community pool. They were sporting bikinis and sunglasses when the bully showed up. Seems like there's one of those in every childhood, right? Melinda did not like Suzy Quan or her friend at all, and she couldn't miss this opportunity. "Hey, it's the slanted-eyed Siamese twin freaks, Ching Chong Ding." Well, Suzy didn't even blink. She just came back with a slur of her own, stating that she didn't know that fat cows could talk. Well, that really angered Melinda, and an hour later, when Suzy was making her way to the restroom, Melinda blindsided her. She saw Suzy walking near the pool's edge, and then she charged, full sprint, and slam, open palms. Suzy was hit hard. So hard, in fact, that she was knocked out of her sandals, and then boom, she hit the surface of the water. After that, everything slowed. The critical moment was just as her head was dropping below the surface, because right then she took in this really deep breath. Chlorine-saturated water filled her lungs. Inside of her chest, it felt as if tiny explosions were all going off at the same time. And in that moment, there was no up or down, just pure panic. Every cell in her body screamed for air. And then she heard this voice, soft, calm, feminine. "Suzy, just let go." Well, at first, she fought as hard as she could. But before long, the pain vanished, the terror dissolved, the thrashing, the desperation, the panic, all gone, replaced by silence and this utter darkness. And then something ancient. She was no longer in the water. As a matter of fact, she was no longer in this three-dimensional world that you and I live in. And she didn't have a body. No, she was completely weightless, and she was moving at an insanely high rate of speed. She could see other orbs of light all around her, silent and bright, all moving in the same direction, and instantly she understood that they were all other souls, like her, so she too must be this orb of light. It was as if they were all streaming upward like sparks from a crackling fire, and above them, tiny point of brilliance. And in that moment, There was no fear, no worry, no sadness, only joy, clean, electric, overwhelming, actually. And just then, a single powerful feeling bubbled up within her. I'm going home. Well, she accelerated until that pinpoint of brilliance above her swallowed her whole. She was pure light, entering pure light, and there was no way to know where her soul stopped and eternity began. She was still Susie, every memory, every laugh, every tear, but she was also something more, vastly more, infinitely more. Her consciousness expanded like a drop of ink blooming in clear water. She understood things that she had never been taught. She remembered things that she had never experienced, at least not in her most recent life. Past lives flickered at the edges of her awareness, like half-seen photographs, faces, places, lessons learned, and then forgotten. Interestingly, the body that she had just left behind held no sentimental value for her. It felt more like an old coat that she had worn rather than a person that she had just been. Comfortable once, yet no longer necessary. Well, she found herself not exactly standing, but rather existing, I guess, in a garden that was so vivid that it made the world that she knew seem like a faded sketchbook. The green was impossible, deeper than emerald, softer than moss, alive in a way that the human eye just cannot capture. Flowers the size of dinner plates opened and closed in slow rhythmic fashion, releasing a scent that carried, well, memory itself. Butterflies, the color of stained glass, drifted overhead. A pond that reflected not the sky, but stars. Trillions of stars, even more, swimming in perfect silence, stretched out in front of her. And she felt connected to every blade of grass, every petal, every ripple in the water. She was a part of everything, and everything was a part of her. The most amazing melody floated everywhere, not random, not chaotic, but harmoniously, as though the birds all understood that they were singing to someone who had just come home. What felt like a gentle breeze, perhaps, brushed against her, carrying the scent of lilac and rain, and something older than both, something from a different universe. She knew this place, not from ancient religious tales, not from photographs or stories. No, she had been here before. Suzy Quan existed in what could only be described as paradise, and the subtle realization welled up within her like a warm friend. This was not her first time here, and in that moment she understood why memories of past lives are sealed away before birth. The sheer vastness of the mind and eternity would be way too heavy and too distracting. Each soul comes to the physical world to experience, to learn, to feel the sharp edges of pain and the redeeming power of gratitude and joy. When the lessons are complete, the soul returns and then rests. And then, when ready, it chooses again. Well, as she moved, she noticed this thick line of fog hanging at the far end of the garden, like a dense curtain, and she felt its pull, a quiet finality. If she crossed it, there would be no coming back. Not as Suzy Quan, anyway. And then from this mist, a man stepped forward, and she knew him. He had been Suzy's father, and so therefore, for the moment, he was her father. But she also knew him on a much deeper level. He looked younger than she had remembered, handsome, rested. Well, he smiled the way that he used to smile when she was young, and then she cried out, "Daddy," before she even realized that she had said it. And then an instant later, they were connected as spirits. But there was a physicalness to it as well. She could feel his embrace, and she could smell his aftershave. Well, they spoke without words, heart to heart, telepathically, I guess. I love you, I miss you, I'm proud of you. Then, gently, apologetically, he said, "You have to go back. Your time isn't finished. We'll see each other again." And then a moment later, he was back beyond that fog, gone. She stood stunned and a bit angry. Return? Why? Why leave this perfect place, this peace? No, I'm not going back. Definitely not going back as Susie. No way. If anything, I'm going forward. And just as she was thinking that, a presence entered her awareness, someone older, wiser. And then, in her mind's eye, she could see him. It was a man in a deep red robe. His face glowed with this golden light, and his eyes seemed to hold galaxies. And in his presence was pure, unconditional love. She knew him instantly as a guide, not the supreme source, but someone holy, someone sent to greet her. "Am I not home?" she asked fearfully. He smiled and he said, "Let's stroll together." While they moved along the garden path, bees hummed, butterflies danced. Bliss wrapped itself around her like a warm blanket. "You're never alone," he told her, which only added to her anxiety. And as she was pondering that thought, he showed her images of the physical world. First, her mother in the emergency room, sobbing, broken the same way that she had cried when her father had died. Then 2 baby boys, Susan's sons, not yet born. The wise men conveyed without words, if she returned, these children would come. They would grow strong, and they would touch lives and affect the world, and they would make her very proud, proud beyond measure. "Your days on Earth will pass. They'll pass so fast, it'll be the blink of an eye," he said, "and then we'll meet again." He never demanded anything. No, the choice was always hers. She looked into his eyes, saw the universe reflected there, stars without end. She took one last breath of this garden air, and then she said, "Thank you. I'm ready to return now." And an instant later, she was pulled back, sucked right through the crown of her head. And then immediately, pain slammed into her like a freight train. Ribs cracked from the compressions that had been done to stimulate her heart. Lungs burned. Throat raw from that tube. Back scorched from the hot concrete when they pulled her out of the pool. She gagged and convulsed, and then Dr. Mohamed froze in mid-compression, and he said, "She's back." The room erupted in quiet celebration. Suzy Quan had been clinically dead for 32 minutes. And she had no idea that when she returned, something else came with her. Something that would change her life and the lives of others forever. Something that would lead her straight to a boy at the bottom of a lake, and straight to the man who had put him there. Suzy Quan had just made the most difficult decision of her existence. She was in that impossible perfect garden, and then she was told that her story wasn't yet over, but the choice was hers, and she chose to come back. Talk about a difficult choice, right? Now, in the ER, she was teetering on the brink of death, just revived after 32 minutes of flatlining. Well, they adjusted her IV, stabilized her, and then they moved her to a bed in the intensive care unit. Dr. Mohamed came by and checked on her every day. On the 3rd day, he sat on the edge of the bed and he took her hand and he asked her softly if she had remembered anything from the time when she was asleep. Well, Susie looked at him and she wanted to say that she wasn't asleep. She wanted to say that she was dead, and then she wanted to tell him all about her experience. But something in his eyes made her think that he just wouldn't believe her. So instead, she just shook her head no and then said that she didn't remember anything at all. Well, in that moment, things got a little weird, because as their eyes were locked, the silence continued. Dr. Mohamed just kept staring at her as if he knew that she had something else to say. And then, almost as an afterthought, she asked, "Is there a red number 7 painted on the top of the ambulance roof? The ambulance that brought me in?" Dr. Mohamed tilted his head and he said, "Why would you ask that?" Susie just shrugged. So he finished his wellness check and then he went on. The next day, when he came back, he didn't sit. No, he stood with this look of bewilderment and confusion on his face. "I checked," he said. "You arrived in Unit 7. So, yes, Susie, in answer to your question, there was a large number 7 on top of the roof of the ambulance that brought you in." Susie just thought about it for a moment, and Dr. Mohamed really didn't know what to make of it. Well, that moment passed, and before long, Susie was ready to go home. One of the very last things that she was told before she left the hospital was that oftentimes people who have gone through what Susie had experience profound changes in their lives. Well, Susie thought that this meant something like she would be more grateful or contemplative or something like that. She had no idea what was about to happen. It began with little things, and it felt so innate that she scarcely even noticed it. Things like the phone would ring and she would know who was calling and why. Something that happens to a lot of people, I would think. But then things got a little bit more intense. For instance, she could be walking through the mall and she would suddenly know when someone was about to say something and what they were going to say. Not everything, not every single thought, but at least the emotionally charged ones for sure. Lies especially. She could feel a lie coming on like a cold draft. Sometimes, late at night, and I thought this was especially interesting, glowing orbs drifted through her room, soft, silent, and gone in seconds. And then her dead grandmother started to visit her, not just in her dreams. No, Susie would be wide awake. No words, just her grandmother's unmistakable presence, and then this wave of love that filled the room for a moment and then left. Life in general felt a lot sharper. Colors were brighter somehow. People's intentions were more clear. She didn't have to try to experience this new way of life. No, it just came naturally. And there was something else, something that started subtly, something that she didn't quite understand at first. She was hearing things, voices. She was hearing voices of the dead. And then, on Thursday afternoon, 1992, a boy named Aaron Fitzpatrick went missing, and the police had no idea where to look. But Susie, she did. Susie and her family were in the living room when the local news came on. Normally, Susie didn't pay attention to the news, but there was something about this broadcast that got her attention.
9-year-old Aaron Fitzpatrick disappeared while riding his bike with friends Thursday afternoon. He was last seen around 3 p.m. on Clay Avenue, near Shawnee County Central Park. The public is asked to contact the sheriff's department if they have any knowledge to his whereabouts.
The news showed a picture of a class photo of a little boy. The moment that Susie saw the picture and heard the name Aaron Fitzpatrick, well, her stomach dropped and she felt as if she were going to vomit. She barely made it to the bathroom before she lost her dinner. Interestingly, Jade, the family cat, followed her as if it understood that something was off. Well, after a minute with her and Jade sitting on the bathroom floor, she regained her equilibrium, and then she understood. She was connected to this little boy. Well, she climbed the stairs up to her bedroom, Jade still following her. She shut the door. She lit a candle, and then she sat in the dark. She closed her eyes and focused all of her attention on that class photo, and she just waited. And within minutes, she was in this deep trance, somewhere else, lost in space and time. And in that reality, she felt a jolt of energy, and then she received flashes, pieces of information. She saw an out-of-focus, pot-bellied man with the letter E floating above his head. He was dirty, and he reeked of poor hygiene. She saw a car. It was a yellow hatchback, a gray brick house with a red brick driveway, a basement, a blood-stained mattress on the floor, handcuffs, a piece of clothesline, a pack of Camel cigarettes, a Joe Camel bandana, and then deep water, dark, murky. Well, she pulled herself out of the trance. She grabbed a notebook and she wrote it all down in quick bullet points. The experience was too real to just be her imagination, and she had grown accustomed to being able to see things that other people couldn't. She knew that Aaron had already left his body. She also knew that he was still waiting for someone to find him, waiting for justice, I guess. Well, the next morning, she told her mother that she thought that maybe she could help the police find this missing boy. And her mother didn't hesitate. By this time, she was already very familiar with Susie's unexplainable connection with reality. So she drove her to the Shawnee County Sheriff's Department. and eventually she was brought to the detective on duty, and she calmly told him everything that she had learned about the case. She said that they needed to be looking for a yellow car and a pot-bellied man, somehow connected to the letter E. She told him about the blood-soaked mattress in the basement, the clothesline, the Joe Camel bandana, the handcuffs. Well, the detective listened and he took notes, and then he asked the question that she knew was coming. And exactly how do you know all of this? Well, Susie, filled with a bold spirit, I guess, just leaned in close, looked him directly in the eyes, and then said, "Aaron told me." Well, the detective stared for a few moments, not really knowing what to think. And then he spoke in a very distant and confused tone, breaking up his sentence slightly. He said, "I'm gonna go get someone now. I'll be right back." Suzy Quan and her mother were sitting in a small interview room. Susie's notebook was on the table, and a detective had just listened to Susie tell him that she had been in contact with a missing little boy. This detective left the room, and a few moments later, the door opened again. The first detective stepped back in, and another man, taller, older, graying at the temples, badge clipped to his belt, came in behind him. He was introduced as the lead detective on Aaron's case, while the two men sat across from Susie and her mother. Then the lead detective reached across the table, pulled Susie's notebook over, and read each bullet point. Yellow Chevy Vega, Joe Camel bandana, clothesline, handcuffs, blood-soaked mattress in a basement, deep, murky water near the boat rentals in Shawnee Lake. While he shifted in his seat, closed the notebook slowly, and then looked up at Susie. "And how do you know these things?" Well, Susie answered the same way she had with the other detective, without hesitation. "Aaron told me." Well, the lead detective's eyes narrowed. He glanced at the other officer, then back at her. "Let me make sure I understand. You're saying to me that a 9-year-old boy who's been missing for days spoke to you, what, in your head, I guess?" "Yes, that's exactly what happened," Susie said. Well, the detective thought about it for a second, then he said, "Seriously, how do you know this? Because we haven't shared this with the public, and you know way more than you should. So either you're the luckiest guesser that I've ever met, or you were there. Or," Susie said, "someone told me." "Okay, let's go with that. Someone told you. Who told you?" "Well, you know what's coming, right?" "Aaron told me." It's getting a little comical at this point. Well, the detective was becoming frustrated. But Susie, she continued strong. "Look, I've never met Aaron. I've never seen that yellow car before. But Aaron showed me, and whether you want to believe it or not, this boy is dead, but he's still around, and he wants his body found, and he wants the man who did this stopped." At a complete and utter loss, the detective said, "Okay, let's go ahead and go with that. Let's just say that somehow you can hear these thoughts coming from this missing boy, and you say that he's dead. All right then, exactly where would we find his body?" Well, without missing a beat, Susie said that you'll find the body in Shawnee Lake by the boat rentals in the deep water at the very bottom of the lake. Well, the location was so precise, and with her somehow already knowing so many other details about the case, the detective decided that he would act on that information. And later that day, the police divers were in the water at Shawnee Lake exactly where she had said, right by the boat rentals. One of them brushed up against something soft. It wasn't weeds or driftwood. No, as I said in the beginning, it was fabric. The boy that the police had been searching for days was finally found, and he was found precisely where a 17-year-old girl said that he would be. But Susie wasn't finished yet. No, by the time that this whole thing was over, the police would find that house with that yellow Vega parked around back. Inside, they found the basement, described exactly as she said it was, with blood-soaked mattress on the floor. The man who lived there? Timothy Allen Franklin. And in many circles, he went by the nickname of Mr. Ed. There's that E that Susie saw. Well, they brought him in, and of course, he denied everything. But the evidence was just overwhelming. He was charged, tried, and convicted. Then, interestingly, just 4 years later, fellow inmates killed him in his cell. This case marked a change for Suzy. Up until this took place, Suzy's, I guess if you want to call them psychic abilities, were just interesting oddities. But after this, well, she realized that she could use them to make a difference in the world. Amy found this story in this book, Freefall, written by Terry Lovelace. If you watched our last video, then you saw Terry's own chilling abduction experience. After he came forward publicly, several people wrote to him with powerful, unexplainable experiences of their own. One of those people was Suzy Quan. Terry investigated her case, wrote about it in his book, and then because it was Terry, Amy reached out to him directly. We know the guy, right? Well, he assured us that this story is 100% true, but the names and the places have been changed at Suzy's request. And he wouldn't give us any more details than that. He said that he made a promise to Suzy to protect her anonymity, and he wasn't going to break that trust. And we understand that. We never want to infiltrate someone's privacy. But, and I've said this before, you guys know Amy, we at least want to make sure we can verify a story before we put it on the show. And Amy spent a lot of time trying to do that with this story. She looked for anything that might make a good match. Any trace of a 14-year-old girl in Topeka clinically dead for 32 minutes in 1989 or somewhere around that date. A 9-year-old little boy abducted and then found in Shawnee Lake somewhere around 1992. A killer named something like Timothy Allen Franklin, who wasn't only convicted, but he was also killed in prison 4 years later. These are details that, names changed or not, in today's information age seem impossible to hide, right? Well, Amy searched and searched. She looked through news archives, crime databases, NDE reports, Kansas records, and nothing lined up. Nothing even came close. She even looked into the medical side of things. 32 minutes without a pulse in the summer heat? Well, most doctors would call that medically implausible. So, from where Amy sits, this story doesn't hold up under scrutiny. It has all of the hallmarks of a compelling NDE tale: beautiful garden, loving father, wise spiritual guide, psychic gifts. But when we try to pin it to reality, the pieces just don't line up. And I hate that. I really do. Because I love feel-good stories like this. Now, to be fair, Terry has always struck us as a genuine person. Amy and I both spoke to him several times over the phone. Perhaps the core of this story is exactly what he shares in his book, and somehow he just changed enough of the information so that Suzy Quan's identity can never be discovered. I don't know. But just because we couldn't verify this particular case doesn't mean that every NDE or every psychic experience is false. Not at all. People have reported these things for centuries. Light tunnels, life reviews, moments that feel more real than waking life. I have my own NDE experience, and maybe one day I'll be brave enough to share it. And as I said 1,000,000 times, the human mind is capable of extraordinary things. Trauma can sharpen intuition. Grief can open perception in ways that science really can't understand just yet. Consciousness itself is still one of the biggest unsolved mysteries in the universe. So maybe the real question isn't whether Suzy Quan really heard a dead boy's voice. And you guys know where I'm going with this, right? All philosophical on you. Maybe the real question is, are we brave enough to ponder the possibility that the dead just might be able to speak? And they just might, at times, be speaking to you or to me. We don't notice this because our senses aren't honed quite right yet. We haven't exercised that muscle. And if that's the case, well, then every time that we refuse to take a second look and try to exercise that muscle, well, we're choosing to stay in the dark, right? And oftentimes, at least for me, the dark is a very lonely place to be.
At the very end of the book, there's a note from Suzy. She says that after she grew up, she went to medical school. She had the 2 sons that she was shown during her experience, And she ends with, "Thank you for reading, and please join me again when I share the rest of my life soon." I genuinely hope that she does, because right now, I can't verify the core events of this story. And I looked hard, and nothing publicly available lines up with the details presented. But that doesn't prove that this case is false. But what it does mean for me is that it's unverified. Maybe one day she will step forward with her real name and documentation, and if that happens, I will gladly revisit this. Until then, if you love mysteries that live right on the line between belief and evidence, check out one of the other stories on this screen.